Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to AA Media. Today we have another exceptional guest, another guy who's going to talk about his life story. We're going to talk about meditation, and we're going to end it with a sick freestyle. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Carson. Carson, do you want to introduce yourself?
What's up, y'all? Carson. I'm a senior, Albie's friend. I guess I'm a rapper. I'm not really a rapper. I just do it for fun. I'm not a meditation expert or anything, but I meditate a fair amount, know a good bit about it. Definitely helped me a lot. Looking forward to the conversation for sure.
Yeah. So you also just came out of the LSAT. How did that feel?
So I would describe that as the most stressful experience of my life just because it's only 2 hours, 45 minutes. And yet within that time, you're thinking, this will fundamentally change the course of my life if I do well, and it will set me back tremendously if I do badly. And honestly, that's a decent segue into meditation because I found myself using a lot of the techniques from meditation practice to cope with the immense stress which the LSAT presented to me.
Right. I think when you're taking an exam, most of the time you have a lot of thoughts going on in your head, and you need to kind of filter those thoughts to figure out which thought right now would be the most beneficial in answering this question. So how did you deal with that abundance of flows and like information that was going to your head to pick the best one to answer the question in the exam?
What's interesting is I would sort of call that a misconception because what I would describe it more as is you have all of these thoughts and you don't dial into any specific thought.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of having a thought resonate with you saying, oh, this thought is me, it's more like you're saying, I'm just an observer of my thoughts. I'm not the thoughts themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? And so then I would describe like actually taking the test as being thoughtless, sort of being so dialed in to the process of taking the test that you forget about the other thoughts, or you see the other thoughts, but they don't mean anything to you. Just like having a bird fly across like a clear blue sky. Like you don't really notice the bird.
It kind of reminds me of the definition of focus, which is nothing more than absence of distractions. So I guess like it could relate to what you're saying, that it's not that you have a lot of thoughts, it's the lack of noise in a way that helps you kind of focus more. Do you think that with meditation, you're able to enhance focus that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do normally?
Absolutely, yes. I sort of have a natural ability to hyper-focus on things if I'm really passionate about it. But I'd say meditation helps even more so with that just because meditation is about being totally present. It is about ignoring the sort of buzz that most people have in their minds. What's interesting is most people, if you ask them to count to 10 mentally,
Mm-hmm.
are not able to do it before having a thought that interrupts them. So maybe they could complete the count, but during that thought, they'll also have other thoughts sort of rushing in, interrupting the count. So it's amazing, especially in today's like social media atmosphere where there's a sort of focus economy, attention economy,
Mm-hmm.
where people are being pulled in so many different directions. Like every time you hear the buzz of your phone, your thoughts immediately it's like a jumpiness sort of to go to those thoughts. I think that meditation is especially important now.
Yeah. I think another point that I would say that for meditation is important and life-changing, it's how it contributes to the intrapersonal relationship. And we kind of talked about this the other day, that there's 7 like forms of intelligence, and
Mm-hmm.
2, the ones that we kind of talked about was interpersonal and intrapersonal, where interpersonal is your relationship with others, empathy and all that. And intrapersonal is like the relationship that you have with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I'm not the best guy at like meditation, or I'm not, a doctor of meditation, but from my personal experience, one thing that I've noticed is how do I view myself? And I think that's very crucial because self-love, confidence, anxiety, all these emotions are kind of like related to how you feel with yourself, how comfortable you are. So I'm interested in your perspective. Has your relationship with yourself changed as you keep practicing meditation more and more?
Absolutely. The answer is absolutely. There's this cliche that exists that you're your own harshest critic, and it's absolutely true. We have so many thoughts about ourselves. There's a statistic, around 70% of the thoughts we have about ourselves are negative. we're much more prone to negative thoughts than positive thoughts about ourselves. And then one tenet of meditation is, how can you be a friend to yourself?
Right.
A good way to think about this is, okay, if me was my friend, how would I treat it differently? Would I take better care of that person? And I think the answer is usually yes. Like, what I find is we're so self-absorbed, and yet we're sort of willing to help others so much versus helping ourselves. We're just sort of unaware of the ability to help ourselves.
Right.
So I think that absolutely simple changes, awareness of your emotions. This is an interesting one.
Yeah, I want to stay in that topic more.
Okay, so the interesting thing about emotions is, if you really think about it, all an emotion really is just like a bodily sensation. So, for example, when you feel nervous, you feel it in a certain part of your body, right? The next time you're nervous or angry, you can notice this more deeply.
Yeah.
But if you really look into an emotion, it's amazing how the emotion actually dissipates.
Yeah, and I can provide one example that just happened to me yesterday. Going to the pontoons, which was like a big like Vandy thing. I was with Isaiah, and I kind of got my finger stuck in his car because I was just like slammed his door, and the finger started like immediately swelling, and I was feeling like this immense pain. But then the same moment that I started feeling the pain, I also told myself, this is what pain feels like. And just that awareness of the pain kind of like helped me, go through the situation. And that's like just a minor example. I've noticed it also in gym. For example, when you push or like when you pull, you probably feel some form of discomfort. But I think the awareness of that discomfort kind of alleviates it. And then I think that could be applied to other emotions. But I would ask you the question, do you think eliminating the presence of emotions is something that you need to strive for, you need to like seek?
No. I used to be very into Stoicism, so I read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I read a few other books related to that. There was like a Stoic YouTube channel that I watched. But what I found is that the attempt to remove emotion totally is impossible. And if anything, it just leads to that emotion becoming more intense, because you think like this: oh, I'm feeling nervous, right? Let me eliminate this nervousness. Oh my God, it's not going away. And that sort of creates this negative thought loop, right? Where you're like, oh my God, you're becoming nervous about the fact that you're nervous, right? There's really, the only way to eliminate emotion is probably just to be born a sociopath or something like that. Like, everyone feels emotions, and the truth is that we have no control over, or we have limited control, I should say.
I do think we have
some control. We absolutely have some control. But if people could never feel nervous, they would probably choose to do that, right? And then maybe a good segue for this as well, something we talked about a few days ago, was this labeling, right? So we talk about, for example, nervousness, right? You could easily also categorize that as excitement or as motivation, right? So transitioning back to the LSAT, when I was taking the LSAT, right? I sort of needed that nervousness to be aware and focused, right? Because the LSAT can be a boring test. Like, I'm reading about how possums playing dead is like the reaction in the possum's body, and typically, like, I would be super bored. Like, if I was reading this for like a homework thing and it was something casual, I would skim it and barely read it, right? But because I'm aware, hey, this is the LSAT, oh my God, I need to do well, it actually allows you to dial in. Oh my God, it's so interesting. Possums dying. It's called thanatosis. I still remember from the article. I'm like, you have to, feign interest, sort of. And so nervousness, all emotions are really tools to your objective. Your body knows.
I like that.
Because emotions are bodily responses, right? So when you feel anger, there's a reason you're feeling that anger. Typically, it's like justified. If people going to war didn't feel like a sort of anger or whatever you would label that feeling, right? If they were just relaxed and calm, la-di-da-di-da, then we probably wouldn't have good soldiers. If doctors didn't feel that nervousness before performing surgery, then they might be too nonchalant, have an error in the surgery, et cetera, et cetera.
Don't you think those jobs, like doctors or the ones that require kind of more technical aspects, are getting replaced by robots or computers who don't necessarily have those emotions?
I mean, this is probably a little bit outside of my expertise, but absolutely machines are replacing. Do I think that's a bad thing? No, because humans are inherently flawed, obviously. And even someone who practices meditation every day will still occasionally lapse in their attention, occasionally become too nervous to properly execute on their job. So I think for things like that, it's good.
Yeah.
I think when you talk about machines replacing, jobs where emotions are relevant, like for example, creatives, that scares me.
Yeah.
Like, when will machines start writing our movies and our novels and inform our culture in that way? That scares me.
Yeah.
It doesn't scare me at all for replacing things like doctors or truck drivers or food services.
Redundant tasks that could be
these
completed.
sorts of things. Yeah.
I want to get like back to the meditation practice, and one thing that I personally thought I did wrong was have a misconception how you perform meditation or what meditation actually meant. Like, coming from Macedonia, it's not really like a topic that people talk about, and most people would view it as, oh, he's just sitting on his own, like he's thinking on his mind, like he's doing some maybe breathing techniques. How would you describe, or how would you kind of provide this idea that maybe sitting with your thoughts and being in that breathing state and having that awareness is beneficial and everybody could have like actual results?
So before I address that, let me start by saying there is sort of a cultural barrier to meditation practice. And that is because meditation practice obviously began in the Eastern tradition, which has a different set of cultural standards, obviously. So often it's really difficult for people from a more Western background, or maybe in your case, like Eastern European as well. There's always a sort of barrier. And so it is helpful to find people that can sort of translate between these cultural lines. That's number one, I would say. One guy for me would be like Sam Harris.
Yeah, I've seen his
who I
videos.
think is incredible and very useful. On the topic of just sitting with your thoughts, right? You were asking me, like, is that meditation essentially, or is that useful?
Is that something that you would categorize as meditation, or is there like a bigger practice with more stricter to follow rules?
So the thing about meditation is you can't do it wrong. And there's 1,000 different types of meditation. You could observe your breathing. You could observe your thoughts. You could close your eyes, look at the blackness within your eyes, try to see the color within that blackness. You could try to make your vision as wide as possible, actually. That's an interesting one, because the fight or flight response engages a mechanism in our brain that narrows our vision. And so actually when you're within that flight or flight response, what you might label as nervousness, you actually have a very narrow field of vision. So if you want to relax, something interesting, you could stare at one point and try to make your vision as wide as possible, open up that peripheral vision, and you'll find yourself calmed down like very easily. So there's so many ways to meditate. But at the end of the day, if you want to know like the end goal of meditation, it would be a release from identifying with your thoughts.
Release of identifying your thoughts.
Release of identification with your thoughts. That would be the end goal.
How does the factor of time come into play in meditation? And I ask this question because I read the book of Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now.
I've read that.
It's a great book. I totally recommend. And I think he was making the argument that a minute spent on thinking about the future or the past is a minute wasted, quote unquote, that you can spend on the present. So on the topic of meditation, do you consider time as something that is a spectrum, like the future, the past, the present, or does that kind of dissolve into the whole practice?
So I guess the answer to this would be that you can't engage with the future or present ever. It's impossible. You're engaging with fabrications of the future and past. Because even say the past, because the future obviously you can't predict. No one can predict. But let's take the past, right? You have these memories, obviously. They've done tests on people where they find objective standards by which to test people's memory, right? Like they'll locate photographs or things like that, so that there's objective standards. And they find that people answer less than 50% of the questions correctly. And the reason why this is because memory, the point of memory, isn't to retain information. It's to adapt information to the present.
Yeah.
It's to use what has happened in the past to inform your behavior in the present. The past doesn't exist. We really have no access to the past. Even memories, this is kind of a scary thought, but even the memories that you hold most true, that you think, absolutely, this is a core memory for me, lots of details in that memory are made up by you.
I totally agree with that. And I heard also Jordan Peterson make a point about the past memories where he says that some of them could be fake, but the point of thinking about the past is not to retain that information, but rather to interpret it in a way so that you can learn from it and provide that lesson to the current situation, to the current moment that you have. But the past is like, I think, a little bit more difficult, a little more easier than the future because it's already happened, and perhaps it could be misinterpreted or misinformed since you can create the fake memories. But the future is like this field of opportunities where you can think in different, waves and in different possible existences. Like I have different versions of myself in the future. One where I'm like super successful, and the other one is like I'm going back to Macedonia, and like one is in America. So how do you deal with the fact that you have an array of options, but you perhaps might not live any of them? I just want to see what you think of the future more than the past.
So I'll start by saying that when I was younger, I always sort of ignored the past. I was like, the past is boring. It's happened. I was obsessed with the future. So I was raised on like science fiction novels. I really wanted to be a science fiction writer. I was incredibly interested in politics, so policies that shape the future, essentially. And so the future is super enticing, because there's all these opportunities, right? So like when I look at my future, there's all these things like, okay, I could be a lawyer, I could be a big shot corporate lawyer, I could be a rapper, I could be homeless on the street.
Yeah.
There's all of these opportunities, so it's very enticing. And it's difficult to escape that. You'll probably never get to a point where you don't think about the future at all. The only way that I know to ignore those sorts of possibilities is just to ground yourself with the present, which is what meditation does.
Grounding yourself with the present. What do you mean by grounding?
Grounding yourself. So just taking a deep breath, something like that. Becoming aware of your body, how your body feels. You can do a full body scan, going from the top of your head all the way down to your toes, things like this.
I've heard also that your body is the best pharmacy. It can provide all the medications that you need. You just need to be able to access that. And to me, it always has bothered that when you take a drug, it might have some certain medication performances. It could alleviate pain. I've always been interested whether you can do that with your mind. And I know this comes into like pseudoscience, and I'm by no means an expert in this topic, but I just am curious, have you read anything about that, or have you ever thought of how can I use my mind to like kind of deal with pain and maybe provide a solution for that?
So it's not pseudoscience at all, in my opinion. I hate pseudoscience. I hate like zodiac signs, things like that, or like crystals. I'm like, this isn't.
You don't like the horoscope at all?
No, I'm like, why are you doing this? You're just making this up. You're making up some lie to try to deal with your
people
problems.
like speculation.
Yeah, sure, it's fun, but it's useless at the end of the day. What I would say is the body and mind are totally, they work together. They're not separate. There's not some boundary between the mind and the body. So, I mean, that's why we see these like placebo tests all the time. Right. And
they're
everyone's
always
obsessed with placebos, and it works. And there's a reason why it works. Like, it's just, well, I think the issue is that there's been all these people that try to capitalize off that sort of relationship and make these the power of positive thinking, self-help books. And so then it's just become associated with pseudoscience. But the truth is that there's absolutely concrete examples of how mindfulness practice can help with physical ailments. There's a reason why monks can walk on red hot coals, right? There's a reason that that's the case, and that is because they have such a refined relationship that they've established between the mind and body, that perfect connection, that positive feedback, and they tend to live longer. That's
Yeah.
that's something else. Like, literally helps you to get over diseases. It's just these like, I think this is why I hate the pseudoscience stuff, because that becomes associated with things that are actually helpful
Happening.
that are in the same realm. So meditation becomes the same as astrology,
Yeah.
and meditation becomes the same as crystals
Yeah.
and tarot cards,
Spirituality
and
and-
yeah, these sorts of things, which are useless. And meditation it's one of the, very well studied. It fundamentally changes your brain. It increases imagination, increases empathy, lowers the response in your brain for nervousness,
Handles stress response system.
makes you happy. Like, they've done MRI scans of practicing monks and then the average person, and their brains are different.
Yeah.
And it's the case for every monk, and it's the case for pretty much every person. And there's a reason why that is,
Yeah. I think personally, the more I get involved into the practice of meditation, the more I'm able to also see the benefits in the day-to-day life. But as somebody, I'm trying to put myself in the perspective of somebody who's hearing about this for the first time, or might think meditation is pseudoscience, like you mentioned, because it's very hard sometimes to like figure out why was this thing associated with pseudoscience. How would you go about like doing your first meditation? How would you go about getting yourself more into this opportunity of intrapersonal development?
So, I mean, it's different for every person, but I can tell you the traditional ways that people start out. The first thing that people typically focus on is the breath, which makes sense because the breath is so accessible. Obviously, you're always breathing, hopefully, or you're dead. And so you just always have the breath to go to. And what I would say to a first-time person, a first-time meditator, is just try it, and you will notice the difference. Absolutely. If you take a deep breath right now, viewers at home, if you take a deep breath, you will feel slightly better.
Yeah.
It's just, I would say, try it. And the thing is, what's really hard about meditation is two things. What's hard is that people go into it trying to get something out of it, right? So why did I start meditation? Because I wanted to be the super relaxed, like chilled out, like super cool. And like for very egoic reasons, right? I wanted to never be nervous. I wanted to be super suave and chill. But if you go into that with that egoic conception before,
With set
it
expectations,
makes it impossible to actually have real results. And the second thing that I think is hard about it is that it's kind of like working out, right? So if me and you went to the gym right now, we got a good lift. Sure, we get like a pump or something. But a few hours pass and you look pretty much the same as you looked after one lift. You can't just lift once and then, you're a bodybuilder. You look like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
it's the consistency that gets
It's the consistency. And it's hard to have concrete progress. You don't really notice progress. It's just one day. Let's say you've been meditating for a few months, and then one day you're like, oh shit. Like,
I'm noticing it.
Like, why I feel less nervous? Why do I have less social anxiety? Why am I more present? Why am I enjoying myself more? Because I've been meditating for the past few months.
And I think also one of the factors that differentiates between successful people is that they can have a better control of their thoughts. Like, they like to do the annoying hard work where people would simply fall into their thoughts that, this is really stressful. I'll probably just go watch Netflix and not do it. But the other person, the successful one, quote unquote, and this is like a very basic example, would be like, yeah, I know that's hard work. I know that's annoying, but that's just a thought. That's just my interpretation. I'll still do it. So kind of like being more productive in a way as well. And I would want to see what you think of this. If you were to start meditation at this age, do you think you'd be able to reach the level of awareness of your thoughts and control of your thoughts as the same person who has started it in a much earlier phase? Or do you think that's not something you want to compare at all?
I mean, it would be hard. But the thing is, progress in meditation isn't linear and isn't specific to any person. So you could have tremendous progress with only a few short sessions, and then sometimes you'll regress. And then you can have tremendous progress again. Or sometimes people who are very self-obsessed, very naturally neurotic people find it very difficult to see any progress. You can't really give a specific answer. But on the topic of successful people and mindset, the most important aspect of success in any industry. That would be my opinion. So one example that I like to talk about would be for sports.
Yeah.
So we look to Michael Jordan.
The GOAT.
Are
you one of those guys, the Jordan over LeBron?
I think so.
Okay, that's another podcast.
That's another topic. But what I would say is, what people don't realize, if you watch Last Dance, did you watch it?
Yeah.
They have an episode where they kind of talk a little bit about his natural mindfulness, and I think that's super underrated. I think that the ability to focus just on playing was something sort of unique to him. Kobe had it as well. And they both talked about Kobe was actually an avid meditator. A lot of people don't know that. I don't know if Jordan meditated, but he absolutely had the traits of someone who does. Incredibly calm under pressure. If you look at even going back to his college days when he hit the buzzer beater to win in the national championship, look at his body language. Like, see how relaxed he is when he gets the ball. Absolutely no care in the world, no stress. He wants the shot. He calls for the ball, first off. He is super relaxed with his body language, gets the shot, makes it easy. Like, I think that mindset is the most important aspect to success in any industry.
I like that. And I think I want to end that on that note, because I'd like to talk about mindset a lot. And I think you're very eloquent in putting complex points into few words. So I appreciate your time with me today.
Thank you. I appreciate
And then
you.
we're going to get to the other part of the podcast, which is him freestyling, right? We're going to switch from like meditation to freestyling. Carson, again, thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure talking to you, bro.
Thank you, man. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.